Hayley, what?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Over to you.
So hi, welcome. We're here today to talk about how to fix meetings. So Graham and I have written a book, and we've now actually got a physical copy of the book, which I'm quite excited about. I think Graham's quite excited too. So yeah, that's awesome. So we want to share with you some thoughts, some ideas about how to make meetings better. Like, so many people that I'm talking to at the moment are experiencing like days of back-to-back meetings. And that was happening before the pandemic, but I think it's happening for more people, even to a greater extent now. And I think by having less meetings, by having better meetings, it helps us to feel less stressed, less overwhelmed. And that in turn makes us feel good. It helps our well-being, and it helps us make better decisions as well. So that's what we're aiming to help you with in the next 45 minutes. So I want you to head to the chat again, if you don't mind, to share with us what do you think is the problem with meetings. And we're going to put a constraint around this. We just want one word. So we're forcing you to be decisive, detailed, unfocused, waffle, long.
This is where the chat becomes not shy. Unfocused, repetition, directionless, agenda, which I'm sure means no agendas, tired, boring.
Indulgent.
Absolutely.
Clueless.
Yeah, the word unfocused coming up a lot there, which is very interesting.
And I like Peter's word there, over-invited. So he's hyphenated it to turn it into one word. Yep. But yeah, I like that.
Cool. These are things that we have been thinking about for a while. Love the word robotic there, Luke, as well. So here are what we see as some of the main problems with meetings that we address through the book. So firstly, there's just too many meetings. The amount of people who we talked to when we started writing the book who said, oh my goodness, I just spend all day in meetings and I really need to stop this culture of back-to-back meetings. And there's a really nice thing doing the rounds this week actually on LinkedIn, which was the heat map of the brain when you have back-to-back Zoom calls all day versus when you have short breaks, and basically showing the stress levels of back-to-back Zooms without breaks just being much, much higher. So back-to-back meetings, too many meetings. I think a few of you mentioned this in the chat, just I don't know why I'm here, just over-invited, just too many people to try and get the job done. I think this is often a symptom of what happens is a lot of meetings are set up because someone sat at their desk, they're thinking about how do I move this thing forward that I'm not quite sure what it should look like. And the obvious thing is, I want to feel like I've got something that I've taken action on. And it's like, well, I'll set up a meeting. And then I know that on the date of the meeting, some progress is going to happen. So it makes you feel good. It releases that little hit of dopamine to say things are moving here. But really what's moving is you've stolen time from lots of your colleagues to be with you in a meeting. So don't know why I'm here. When is the work going to happen? So back-to-back meetings, that's one of the problems, is that you just don't then have the chance to do that follow through, which we'll talk about a bit later. And also just, I think this is particularly prevalent right now, but who's paying attention, and that thing where in Zoom calls, you can end up where people are just turning their cameras off and it's pretty obvious they're just loading the dishwasher or getting on with their lives. And I think when meetings are good, then they're really an important place for people to get together and share attention. So that can be a problem with meetings too.
And the challenge is not just the work that's not done, but it's the cost of those meetings as well. And people tend to think of the cost of a meeting being a meeting room, or the cost of Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you're using. But of course, the cost of people's time. If you had to pay for everybody to come to your meetings, if you invited 10 people and then you get an invoice for their time, people might have less meetings, they might invite less people. So this idea that they're free, or we're already paying for people's time, we want to start thinking about that differently and thinking, actually, this is costing us to have this meeting. What is the cost of this meeting? And is the output of the meeting worth that cost? Is it good value?
One of the things we were thinking about with this book was it sort of struck us that there were two almost polar opposite problems that we wanted to solve when you think about what's the problem with meetings. And that was really reflected nicely in a lot of the chat comments there as well, is on the one hand, there are certain meetings where this meeting is actually useful, it's good, but it just needs to be done better. And then there's the problem of overcrowding of meetings, or there's the problem of just having too many meetings. And so it really got us thinking about the importance of attention. If you have come across my first book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and subsequent work I've done, you'll know that I talk about the idea of, let's just ditch this whole idea of time management and start thinking about how do we manage attention. And attention really is the currency that gets work done. You know, it's when you start to convert that really high quality attention into actions that really things start to happen. Quality thinking ultimately is the thing that solves problems, brings about creativity, moves stuff forward. And that happens in a couple of different ways. So what we need to do is start to think about this as the balance between putting our attention to the right things. So on the one hand here, you've got, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this diagram before, the classic yin and yang diagram. It comes from Chinese dualist thinking. And yin energy is this energy that we need to have in meetings to make them successful. It's about being very intentional about how we listen to each other. It's about being reflective. It's about being thoughtful. It's, you know, really having that focus on what's happened in the past, what we can learn from it, and what's happening right now in the present, and what we're going to do about that. And so that's the kind of energy that we want to have in meetings. Of course, if we have that kind of energy all the time, we just end up in a kind of group counseling session, basically, because it's like we're just talking and listening all the time, but actually nothing's getting done. So on the other hand, we need to have this yang energy, which is about having structure. It's about doing that deep work, getting out of meetings, not being in those back-to-back meetings, and getting your head down to do some real work. So when we think about that, we need to have this balance between our attention being focused on doing a certain number of meetings really well. This idea of yin energy, this idea of reflection and relating with each other. And on the other hand, we have this yang energy of just like, get me out of the meetings, heads down, action. And what's interesting about this diagram is that you have the seed of one within the other, right? So the seed of yin is in yang. So when you're in that head down, doing the work, almost like selective ignorance kind of state, you also need to have a little bit of your ear just listening out for what else is going on. You know, so even when you're deliberately being ignorant, you're deliberately in stealth mode, you're deliberately avoiding meetings, you want to be just listening on the periphery a little bit and just kind of having that awareness of what's going on with the rest of the world. And likewise, when you're in this yin mode, you need the seed of yang in there. You need the seed of structure. So you're in this listening mode, but you need an agenda, you need structure, you need clarity, all those things that the yang energy brings. So we thought this was just a really important way to bring together really the two intentions of the book. One is to cut out as many of the meetings as we can cut out to create that space for doing the real work. And the other is to make sure that when people are in meetings, those meetings are genuinely useful. People are genuinely listening, and we're genuinely, sharing and kind of thinking about our attention with each other. That feels like a really important thing.
The other thing that I think is a really important concept to be thinking about is this idea of 40-20-40. So 40% of our effort and our energy goes into preparing for the meeting, thinking about what it's going to look like, what's your contribution going to be. 20% during, that doesn't mean you only give the meeting 20% of your attention. We want to give it 100% of our attention, but we're talking about in the context of kind of before, during and after. So your meeting is a bit shorter, hopefully, because everybody's really well prepared and isn't the heavy lifting, right? So afterwards, the follow through, looking at about 40%. If the meeting happens and nothing changes, then like, was that worth your time? And there may be occasions where there's a very deliberate decision not to do something. But most of the time, when you come together with others, there's going to be some decisions made, which is going to result in some actions. And before this idea of 40-20-40 was introduced to me, I probably spent about 5% of my effort and attention before the meeting, like 80-90% during and a little bit after. So really kind of changing the dynamics of that. We also want to introduce this idea of the 4 Ps, so good meeting design. So the meeting has a plan, a purpose, like a really good, clear statement of what's the purpose of our time together, and that should be shared with people before the meeting. There's a plan in terms of how it's going to work. So our plan for today, if you like, is that we're going to finish at 2:45. If people have got questions, you should head to the Q&A section and share your questions there, and we'll come to those at the end. meetings should have a clear kind of protocol, like this is how we want it to work. So Graham, I don't know if you remember the meeting that we did at head office, where we were all asked to put our mobile phones into a bucket.
Yeah.
So that was kind of part of the protocols of like, we don't want to be distracted by our phones. And some people loved that, some people hated that. The fourth P is the people. It's like the people that you invite. We want to try and reduce the numbers for our meetings, less people, like better, more effective discussion potentially, but they've got to be the right people. And they've got to know why they're being invited, rather than just, yeah, it's Monday morning, I always go to that meeting on a Monday morning, like what's their role? So more clarity around that, and sharing all of this stuff with people, ideally before the meeting begins.
Yeah, the other nice thing about the 4Ps as well is this is a really good model to use if you just, let's say you're with some colleagues, you're on a Zoom, and suddenly like, can we just spend the next half hour talking about this subject? And there's been no agenda written. It's a spur of the moment kind of spontaneous meeting. It's a really nice thing just to spend the first couple of minutes just going through those 4Ps. Okay, what are we trying to achieve? What's our purpose with this? What's the plan? What's the protocol? Who do we need to have here? And just, using that first couple of minutes to set those kind of boundaries will usually mean that like a spur of the moment meeting as well will just be just much more effective. The other question that we get a lot, especially at the moment, is what about virtual meetings? What's the difference between a virtual meeting and meetings where you're in the room together? Now, I would say that actually there's a frightening amount of similarities, and a lot of things are just the same when it comes to virtual meetings. There are also some ways that with virtual meetings we can actually make those meetings better. So we'll talk about a couple of things towards the end. But one of my favorite ones is, if you've got everybody able to share a screen, then actually you can have somebody typing up the actions from the meeting in a way that everyone's looking at that being written. There can be no, disparity of understanding between how different people view those things. And also you can assign the right kind of dates, the right kind of people to that. I would argue that's actually better than if you're in a meeting room and you don't have a whiteboard, or you don't have, the ability to just kind of see those things together on the screen. Watching video and things like that can actually just be easier logistically to do in a virtual meeting than in face-to-face meetings. So I think let's not just try and see virtual meetings as almost like a poor relation. Let's look at what are the ways that we can make these things actually better than their physical equivalents. And obviously there are just so many benefits in terms of travel and the environment and all these different things where actually virtual meetings can really save us time if we do them well. So let's think about some top tips.
Yeah, so we're going to go through a few top tips. Be great to kind of hear your thoughts in the chat if you have any, and questions, don't forget in the Q&A. So some top tips. One of them, and I think this is really good, a really important way to start a meeting, is to begin with a positive reality. So we said today, like, head to the chat, show there's something that's going well in your world. What that does is it means that people get into the habit of contributing, and that their contribution is a positive one. So it sets the tone for the meeting. And it also means if further on in the meeting, somebody has something that they want to say that maybe might be controversial, or they're worried that people might disagree with them, they've already spoken, and that's not the first time that they're contributing. So some examples, how you're feeling right now, something that's going well in your life. And then finishing with a positive reality as well, as a way to wrap the meeting up. Say, yeah, okay, we're done. We've agreed our next actions. What have you valued from today, or what are you looking forward to? So I did that. I did an Inbox to Zero workshop yesterday, and people talked at the beginning, like how they felt about email. And then I asked them to finish off with one word at the end, like, what they'd taken away from it and how they were feeling about their email. It was much more positive. So that was pretty exciting. So just helps you to see where people have moved.
Yeah, and I remember early on in my career working with a couple of leaders in the charity sector who had worked directly with someone called Nancy Klein, who has this whole methodology called the thinking environment, and this book called Time to Think. And one of those things in that methodology is this idea of beginning and ending with a positive reality. And so I saw this like really firsthand, just how useful that was, and how it really promotes much more of a cohesion and a kind of psychological safety in the way that people work. So definitely found that like super useful personally, and then have just kind of tried to model that ever since. And so it just felt like a really natural thing to go in the book.
And I think it's also one of those things that works equally well in person and online.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One thing, so moving from the sort of yin energy of how do we get people to really listen to each other and and relate to each other, to something that's much more yang, right? Which is how to say no to meetings that you don't necessarily think you should attend. One golden rule that you can start to introduce straight away is no agenda, no attendance. So if I don't know if I don't have a clear definition of what this meeting is actually going to do or be about, then I'm just not going to turn up. The real ninja level version of this is no purpose statement, no attendance. So the agenda should give you a good sort of clear indication of what's going to be discussed. And then the purpose statement is really the why, the kind of why are we here? How do we know when we're done? What do we ultimately want to achieve? So if you can get into the habit within your immediate teams of writing purpose statements at the beginning of the meeting, and we go into that in a lot of detail in the book, but really simply, by the end of the meeting, we will have, and then just some verbs, we will have discussed this, decided on this, set this, whatever those verbs are. But just a simple 3-4 bullet points. It's so useful also as a chair to be able to come back to that and just be like, I know there's a disagreement. I know there's a lot of discussion. I know we're going off point, but here's the purpose. Let me remind you why we're here. And just having that kind of structure, I think, can really help. The other thing I want to talk about is, does anyone have any meetings in your life, in your work, that just go a bit stale, right? So we meet on a Monday morning because we've done that for the last 8 years or wherever it might be. What's funny is, lots. So here's one thing is, I think we need to really start to address this idea of meetings going stale. And what's interesting is I actually had one in my own work last week, and it just started to feel like it's gone a bit stale. And so what I've done is, even though I was still finding that useful, it felt like other people weren't necessarily finding it so useful. I've just cancelled it, right? So I've just cancelled the meeting. I'm going to leave the field fallow for like a month. And then I'm going to come back to it and say, right, what was the purpose of that meeting? What do we still need to achieve? What's the best way of doing that? And that may or may not be a meeting that looks similar or slightly different, but it may be it needs a Slack channel instead, or a WhatsApp group instead, or just an email once a week, or some other way. Now, the thing about when meetings go stale is most meetings are somebody's baby. Like recurring meetings are generally someone's baby. So that it involves a bit of communication and a bit of feedback. You need to be in a culture of feedback to really start to tease this out of people when the general consensus is that something has gone a bit stale, is not serving its purpose, is not that useful. So that can be quite a difficult thing if you're not in that position of power. It can be a difficult thing to really change. But what I'd say is, instigating that through feedback is a really good way to try and encourage that sort of idea of reflection back to who actually kind of owns the meeting, or who is the kind of ultimate kind of sort of parent of that particular meeting.
And encouraging you, whether the meeting is online or in person, to have some breaks. They could just be like 30 seconds to encourage people to move. So if you've got a longer meeting, you might want to encourage people to like take breaks in the middle. So I was in a 2-hour meeting yesterday, and somebody had said, 2-hour meetings feel a bit too long. So we introduced kind of like a 10-minute break in the middle. When I'm delivering sessions that are kind of more than 90 minutes, we'll always have a stretch and move few moments where it's like you focus on something that's further away from the screen, just to get you moving. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you walk into a room and you're like, what have I come in here for? And then you go back to where you were and you kind of remember it. It's that idea of kind of where we are when we think about things can become important. So if you're in a physical room meeting with others, you might want to change chairs, partway through a longer meeting. But I've also done online meetings where we've done like away days where we've done that online. And I've literally been like, right, I'm going to start off the meeting on the sofa with my laptop. Then I'm going to go to the kitchen table. Then I'm going to stand somewhere else. So that allows you to just keep your energy levels up, and just thinking about how you use that movement to your advantage.
Yeah, I have totally the same thing. I have a really terrible memory. So if I'm in like an all-day meeting or all-day conference or something like that, I just try and sit in different parts of the room. And it's usually me putting myself, where was I in that, for that session, or that, that sort of part of the day, which part of the room was I in then? That's usually just kind of spatially how I link things together and kind of remember stuff. So I find it a really useful memory technique as well.
Yeah. And we want you to be aware of the hippo effect. So it's the highest paid person's opinion. So if when you're in a meeting, the highest paid person in that meeting expresses an opinion, people are likely to agree with that person's opinion. And research shows that even if the data is showing something different, people are still likely to agree with the highest paid person. So if that's you, encouraging you to go last, get other people's contributions first, then share your thoughts. If you're facilitating or chairing the meeting, then maybe allow that person to go last. And there are lots of other tools and techniques you can use to help try and make people's contributions more equitable. So that might be like today we've asked people to head to the chat, and that's fine. That's not anonymous. We can see who's saying what, but that might be another way of doing it. One of the early focus groups we did for the book was what's called a silent meeting. So we got people together online. They introduced themselves, so everybody knew who was there and who they were talking to. And then Graham and I had set up 4 or 5 questions on a document that everybody could access. Everybody could see who was writing what on there. And we gave people 15, 20 minutes to kind of answer these questions. And that allowed us to say, well, actually, we don't need to discuss this bit because we can see there's consensus on that. Somebody's raised something over here that I want to know more about. So we then asked people questions and they contributed that live. And it allows us to see like, oh, this is where the disagreement is, or this is the area that needs a bit more of a conversation. And if you're in a room in person doing that, you can do that with Post-it notes. There's loads of different ways of doing that. So thinking about just the hippo effect and making people's contributions equitable.
Yeah, my favorite thing around that, just as a little tool as well, is vote first, discuss second, which sounds really counterintuitive, but often, as Hayley was saying there, you know, what happens with when the highest person gives that opinion, everybody then anchors their opinion based on that. So if it's a numerical thing, you tend to move your number, which disagreed, slightly closer to, you know, that sort of anchored opinion. Or if you thought something was really bad and they think it's really good, then you start to think, oh, maybe it's not so bad. And you start to just question. So just having that sense of being able to vote first before you discuss and just capture those kind of initial unbiased, unanchored thoughts, I think is just a really useful thing. And then just a few other ideas just to sort of throw onto the slide there, just to give you just a big chunk of value very quickly. The one I'm going to pick out from there rather than just read them all out is Jeff Bezos's 2 pizza rule. So the rule is basically never have a meeting where you couldn't feed all of the participants with 2 large pizzas. I did a session with the 2 pizza rule last week, and someone on LinkedIn was like, yeah, we love all the content, but we're really taking issue with the whole 2 pizza thing because it should be 1 pizza per person. But yeah, like my understanding of the 2 pizza rules, if you think about a pizza as being kind of roughly 2 people, something like that, you know, kind of like 4 or 5 people is really where you want to be at as like the kind of maximum size for most meetings. So just a nice little rule just to think about. Just an interesting one is the idea of just banning note taking so that people just have to be a bit more creative and use pictures, and just make sure that you're supplying the right food and drink. And I think this is also really important when we think about online meetings, giving people that extra couple of minutes to boil the kettle. Apparently it takes the UK average is 3.5 minutes to boil a kettle. There you go. Fascinating fact. But just giving people that time to make a drink, to go to the toilet, just have that comfort, and even just starting and ending your meetings at like 5 past and 5:02 or 8 past and 8:02 or something, just so that, you know, you're giving people that little bit of time to say, you actually matter, you know, your comfort level, you having a break, you not being on the next call straight away, that matters to me as the host. And I'm willing to try and share that meeting with just that extra little bit of rigidity or discipline so that you get that. And I think people will always thank you as a chair or as a host if you're able to just kind of make people feel comfortable ultimately.
Yeah, and if you can kind of build into that within your agenda, you're having 5 minutes at the beginning where you say, this is the time in which we're going to be logging on, we're going to be getting comfortable, we're going to be getting our cups of tea, and then the meeting starts at this time. That just gives everybody a bit more clarity rather than people going, oh, 2 o'clock, let's quickly log on. Yeah, so standing up, we've kind of already touched on that. You'll notice that Graham and I are both standing up today to talk to you. Encouraging you to have your cameras on. I know some people don't like cameras on, but I guess if you've got your camera on all day, every day, that can become a bit exhausting, but we want to try and have less meetings where everybody's giving their full energy and attention, and having cameras on can help with that. And the idea that Graham mentioned also in terms of having the actions captured live on the screen. Yeah, cool. I'm just looking at a couple of the comments that are coming in the chat.
Yeah, and so there's a question there saying from an accessibility point of view, 3.5 minutes to go and do the kettle and come back isn't always enough time. And this is the point, is that, making the meeting, setting up the meeting as the host, as the chair, that really values people. If you've got people with access needs, it's going to take longer, that you factor that stuff in. This is just like really, basic courtesy in terms of like how you set up the meeting as host will encourage better contributions in the meeting. And there's just a direct correlation between those two things.
Yeah, and Faye's made a comment about cameras being off. That helps with people's broadband issues. Yeah, so yeah, there's definitely be exceptions, but I guess as a general rule, we think that kind of helps with engagement.
In terms of people's mental broadband, right? In terms of just having that attention and really and sharing that attention really generously with each other, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. Really important. And then the last one I'm going to just finish on before we start to segue into our Q&A towards the end. It's just the idea of next physical actions. It's a really sort of basic productivity 101 thing from my book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja. But the idea is whatever you're going to discuss in a meeting, make sure that number one, you write it down, and someone's job in the meeting is to write it down. And number two, you write it down without vagueness, and you use a little bit of specificity, one of my favorite words. So writing down the next physical action. What can you see someone physically doing in order to take that forward? And a really good practice kind of principle with this is never give an action more than one owner. So there's always one person who, they might not be having to deliver everything as part of it, but their job is to just be accountable and make sure it happens, right? So they might involve other people and delegate stuff, but it's like, I'm going to be here in 2 weeks' time at the next meeting, and it's, it's me being held accountable for that thing rather than two people. And also just ban the use of the word ongoing. So when you're looking at actions and so on, it generally just leads to lazy thinking. It makes people not think about time periods or milestones. Where do we want to be with certain projects? So as soon as you get into ongoing and having 3 different people working on stuff and all of these different vagaries, you end up losing that sense of being specific, which ultimately I think is what really helps good follow through off the back of meetings.
So we want you to have made a difference in terms of coming along and spending your time with us today. So we're going to ask you to head to the chat again to just share any thoughts that you have around, like, from what you've heard. We've given you a very brief overview, and there's some questions coming through as well. So we'll head to the questions shortly. But before we do that, like, from what you've heard, from hopefully encouraging you to think about meetings, just inviting you to head to the chat and share a couple of thoughts, maybe something you're going to have a go at doing. Fantastic. Lorna's going to buy the book, so that's cool. Not just checking in, but checking out as well. People liking the live actions and purpose statements. Setting up meetings at 8 minutes past. Yeah. I particularly like doing that when there are breaks in meetings. Let's say, not give people a round number. Live minutes. Yeah. Breaks.
Lots of great stuff there. And just while you're capturing those, and I'd really encourage you to not just capture them in the chat here, but also capture them for yourself somewhere too as well. We're going to set you a little challenge, and we'd love you to follow this up however you'd like to with us on social media afterwards. So just contacting us on Instagram and LinkedIn, wherever you find, to just let us know how you get on with this. It's called the Delete a Day Challenge. So we're going like real yang here. How can we remove some of the pointless meetings? So what we'd love you to do is go and have a look at your calendar at the end of this session. And first of all, if you've got, let's think about how do we save a day for your team? If you've got a meeting that is going to have 7 people in it and it's going to be 1 hour long, if you can just cancel that meeting and get that thing done in another way, you've just saved 7 hours of time, right? And maybe it's not as simple as that. Maybe when you look at your calendar, it's like, okay, so I'm not really organizing any of the meetings and it's just about my attendance. So let's say there's a meeting where you were going to attend and it was going to be 2 hours long, and then you get that 2 hours back by just saying, I'm not going to attend this one. You've just saved 2 hours. Maybe it might just be a case of, I'm going to go for the bit of the meeting that I'm really needed for. So I'm just going to be there for half an hour, and you've saved an hour and a half. But the idea is, how can we delete 7 hours of time? If you can delete 7 hours of time, then you have the answer to that question, which is when you sit there on a Thursday and you think, oh, if there was only an extra day in the week, I've just got so much to do. Well, go make one, right? By deleting a day, we can create an extra day for our organization. And guess what? If a few people in your team start doing this too, then you're going to save a whole bunch of the time. So that's the delete a day challenge. We would love you to take up that challenge. Keep us posted on how you get on with it. And yeah, good luck with the delete a day challenge. And Lorna and a couple of other people saying that you're going to buy the book. So here is the link to the book. I've just put that in the chat for you. So we are in pre-order mode right now. It comes out on May 17th. And we're really hoping that
13th.
13th, is it?
Yeah.
I had 17th in my, because 17th is my sister's birthday. I had it in my head. So we come out May 13th, and what happens on Amazon is, if you can really kind of flood the pre-orders and do really well on pre-orders, then Amazon will promote it when it comes out more, because they're like, this looks like it's going to be a hot new thing. So like, let's put some promotion behind it. So if you are able to pre-order it on Amazon, we would love you to do that. It's also available on bookshop.org and everywhere else. It will be in some shops as well. But yeah, thank you, those of you who are saying you've pre-ordered it, and we would love to hear what you think of it after you receive it in May.
So we do a whole load of other exciting workshops. We do a fixing meeting session. So we've given you a bit of a taster of some of the things that are in there. We do our How to Be a Productivity Ninja course, which is basically designed for anybody who's got too much work and not enough time to do it in. So that's most people, right? So, and getting your inbox to zero. We also do a session called The Way of the Productivity Ninja, which is lots of hints and tips to help people with their productivity and with their well-being. So we've got loads of questions coming in, Graham.
Yes.
There's one in the chat that I particularly liked. Tell us about
we forgot one other thing, which is I do this thing called Rev Up for the Week, which is like a weekly email. And the idea is it kind of drops something into your inbox that's either positive or productive on a Sunday. So if you want to sign up for that, go to grahamallcott.com/links. I've just put it in the chat. There you go. Go and sign up for Rev Up for the Week. Let's do some questions. Yes, and there was a thing there about endorsement by the Jackie Weaver. The other thing is my podcast, Beyond Busy. Today's new episode is the Jackie Weaver. Very exciting. So yeah, go and check out Beyond Busy today. Do some questions.
So there's a question in the chat. I'm going to pull that one out first before I lose it. Why do people in virtual meetings think it's okay to work whilst they're at the meeting and have their cameras on? Should they even be attending? And I think if we go back to the 4 Ps and thinking about protocols and letting people know what's expected of them can really help with that. Yeah. But yeah, nothing wrong with going back to somebody after a meeting and saying, oh, you didn't seem very engaged. Is this not useful to you? And actually having that conversation. You got anything to add on that, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this comes back very much to the yang energy, right? So we want to be as yin as possible in the meetings that we're in. So deeply listening, deeply participating, deeply involved. And also we want to make as much space as possible for the things that need to happen outside of meetings. So don't be afraid to be, more ruthless with saying no to more meetings. Be much more ruthless in terms of inviting fewer people to the meetings that you're organizing, and figuring out the little bits of politicking that sometimes we have to do when people might feel a little bit left out, feel that little bit of FOMO or whatever. Deal with that as kind of part of the process, rather than wasting 2 hours of that person's time. Adding more people in so the meeting just naturally takes up more airtime, is less efficient. So just these are not, they're not very human instincts, because our human instinct is basically to try and please everybody, to be nice, and so actually just being a little bit more forthright and being a bit more structured, a bit more ruthless with some of these things, I think actually just goes a long way. And if it's done well, people just really appreciate it, I think.
I think it's a kind way to approach it, isn't it? I know your next book, Graham, is about kindness, and I think it's about, if that person doesn't seem to be engaged and isn't getting value from the meeting, to respect that and engage in a conversation.
Yeah, Brené Brown has a lovely quote, which is clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
Yeah.
I think this also speaks to a lot of the sort of current issues around chairing meetings, the sort of challenges of dealing with Zoom meetings and all of that, is that we often have this instinct when we're managing people or leading people that we want to give people loads of autonomy. Everything we hear about micromanaging is bad. And so our natural instinct is to try and move away from that as much as possible. But what we lose sometimes by that approach, which I think, by the way, is generally the right approach, what we sometimes lose by that is we sometimes sort of shy away from providing the structure, providing that yang, inside a meeting, right? Where it's like, actually, I'm going to be the timekeeper. I'm going to keep us to time. And you might feel like you're being a bit of a busybody sometimes when you're really kind of, being strict on some of those timings and things like that. But do you know what? People generally appreciate it. Like, even if at the time you feel like, oh, I don't want to be that person. And I think the same is true of, so Elena, our managing director, one of the things that she does very famously inside Think Productive is we start a lot of our meetings with not just an opening round, but then Elena will like play some kind of improv game with us or whatever. And it's like, the joke sometimes is that we indulge her in making that happen. But for me, it's real bravery to sort of at the beginning of a meeting, sort of put people in a space which really does help people open up. And there is some real value to doing those improv exercises and stuff. But it's a real leap, right? To actually have the confidence and the boldness to be like, hey, we're going to do this weird thing at the start of the meeting. So don't be afraid to try things, to provide structure, and ultimately do things that feel a little bit like you're controlling, right? And I think this kind of element of control we're not used to because we think of it as micromanaging. But I think in the sense of meetings, generally, especially now, people just really appreciate that sense of, okay, just tell me how we're going to do this and tell me what we're going to do and kind of give me that structure. I think people actually just really like it.
I just saw a question come up in the chat. I find virtual meetings aren't chaired very well. It's a silly example, but somebody might join late and not mute their microphone. They disrupt the content and the flow, and the chair doesn't address it. And it leaves me itching to say something. It's not my place. What's the solution? Often the chair is the hippo. And I think in relation to that, like, yes, the chair has a role to play there, but everybody's turning up as a participant and looking to achieve the same purpose. So I don't think it necessarily has to be the chair that says something, and you can do that in lots of different ways. You might say, oh yeah, don't forget to put your microphone on mute and all that kind of stuff, or just maybe doing something that supports and helps the chair. So you might say, oh, the chair asked us to have our microphones on mute, could everybody that's joined late do that? So just because you're not the chair doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility to helping to make that meeting a success.
Yeah, I would say the other thing, this also comes back to trying to create a culture of continuous feedback, right? Mm-hmm. So I have, by my desk, I have these 4 coins. This was from a thing I did a little while ago called The Kindness Happening. And the idea is you have 4 coins either on one side of your desk or in one pocket. And every time you give a bit of feedback through the day, you move 1 coin to the right-hand side. And the idea is it's just a mindful way to remember to just be constantly thinking for where are the opportunities to give feedback, and to do that at least 4 times a day. But I think the same thing is true in meetings. So if you can just at the end of every meeting, just have as part of your sort of closing round at the end, someone says, even better if, so this meeting was great, but it'd be even better if. So it doesn't need to be confrontational. It doesn't need to be awkward. Even better if, someone didn't turn up at the right time, or can we just make sure that people mute their microphones at certain points? And it just brings us back to those kind of core principles, but it gives you that permission, the space to actually bring those things to the fore, rather than it seem like an attacking, sort of subjective thing. So I think just having like a regular mechanism by which you can just give some feedback to every meeting will just mean that when those really bad ones crop up, it's just really obvious what people are going to be saying. But we tend to just shy away from that kind of feedback, I think.
Yeah, for sure. We've got 13 questions and about 5 minutes. I don't know if there's any in there, Graham, that you particularly want to
I'm only looking at the chat. I haven't looked at the Q&A bit.
Jennifer's got a great question. Top tips to help people shut up when they're rambling, and there are a couple of other questions in there that are kind of similar. So I think the things we talked about a silent meeting can be helpful in terms of asking people to write their thoughts rather than to verbalize their thoughts. I also think if you're chairing the meeting, or even if you're not chairing the meeting, actually, you might say, well, okay, we've got all these people in this meeting. Simon, we haven't heard from you yet. Well, what are your thoughts? So you're making the point that we haven't heard from somebody else. There are people who haven't spoken, but you're also kind of particularly asking that person to give their contributions.
Yeah.
Another way of doing it is giving people a time limit and saying we're going to have like maybe 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it is, 30 seconds to just go around the room and ask people what their thoughts are so that we get to hear from everybody. So there are a few.
I think I was saying before about being really directional and controlling of some of those things can just so go against our instincts. It's like in a room saying, right, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and it's really strict, right? Just feels like so odd to do that. But everyone else in the room, guess what? Everyone appreciates it when you hold everybody to that, right?
Yeah, definitely. Craig says, can you see this working in a public sector environment? Like, yeah, loads of our clients are public sector environment. And yes, definitely. I think for me, I did Think Productive's meetings training when I was working in the charity sector.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
And one of the things that really got me interested in this meetings thing, and why some of them are really good and why some of them weren't, is I went to a lot of meetings for the local authority, and some of the meetings were not great. But there was like this one meeting that stood out. It was amazing. It was people from different organizations, different sectors, all working towards a common purpose. And the expectation was that the meeting would be done outside, the work would be done outside of the meeting. So if you don't have time or you're not willing to take actions, you don't need to come to the meeting. And the chair checked up on people. And this guy's name was Nigel Robinson. And he just really got me thinking about, actually, yes, these meetings can work really well. It just needs good leadership and setting up and really clear expectations from participants. So that was one of the things that inspired me to think more about meetings, actually.
Hayley, are we doing After Dark?
Yeah, let's do After Dark.
So here's how After Dark works is, and this is again us providing the structure, is our commitment to you is to finish at 2:45. So we are going to do a little wrap up in a second on that when we do one more question. But if we haven't got to your question yet, or if anyone else just wants to hang around a bit more, we're just going to do a bit more Q&A. Tends to just be a little bit less formal. I start swearing after the After Dark bit starts. So we'll hang around for another 15 minutes or so after that. But if you obviously have somewhere to be, got to get the kettle on ready for a 3 o'clock, then feel free to log off at 2:45. So we'll do that if we haven't got to your questions. Should we just do one more before we do the wrap up bit? Hayley, do you want to pick one out?
Yeah.
Can I pick out a quick one?
Yes, go for it.
So the question from Jerry is, I'm curious as to why no meetings on a Monday. It doesn't have to be Monday. In fact, Think Productive does it on a Wednesday. And I think any day of the week is fine. But basically the idea is, if you create, I think a lot of productivity comes from constraints, right? Like you do good thinking when you have some kind of constraint to work with. And so the idea of there being one day where you're not allowed to have meetings just allows people to see the benefits of that space being created and having more time to think, having more time to do deep work, to follow through on stuff. And our experience is it doesn't lead to, double the number of meetings on Fridays or Tuesdays or whatever. It actually makes people think a bit harder about, is the meeting needed? So just having it and seeing the benefit of it, I think is often something that really kind of follows through, has a kind of knock-on effect to the rest of the culture as well. Cool. So just before we do the wrap up, we'd love you to go and buy a copy of the book. And we'd also love you to take part in our Delete a Day challenge. So we're at 2:45. Hayley, do you want to give us a little closing word of wisdom as we finish the main part of the session?
Oh, I wasn't prepared for that. But I think a lot of this is about habits, and it's about behaviors, it's about cultures, and culture comes from behaviors, right? So if you're feeling like the culture in our organization is like that some of this stuff might not go down so well, or you're a bit nervous about it, the chances are that if you're overloaded with meetings, other people are too, and they'll be grateful for somebody raising it, somebody coming up with some techniques and some tools to try and do something about it. So I want to encourage you to be brave, give it a try, and let us know how you get on.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here, and look forward to hearing your results on the Delete a Day Challenge. Here endeth the official part of the webinar. And then, as I said that, as it clicked over to 2:46, which is very, very smug about. But we'll hang around for another 15 minutes. So we'll just carry on doing some Q&A. I've put the link to the book back in the chat. So if you have yet to go and pre-order, you can do that there. Let's do another question, shall we?
Yeah, there were quite a few questions that kind of related to that point earlier about, if one person's dominating the conversation. So I think I've kind of pulled those out. So we should be left with the other stuff. I'd be interested in thoughts about daily stand-up meetings. So this is a question from Rosanna. I think that they've helped us stay connected, but now worry we spend too much time talking to each other. So it sounds like there could be some constraints to put in there, perhaps around timings.
Yeah, so Think Productive for many years has done a daily huddle, and our daily huddle, the format of it is like 15 minutes, and every day it just allows people that kind of accountability to say, here's what I'm working on for the day. But also every day we ask people where the business is, where we're performing based on certain metrics. And also we ask in that meeting, like, what are you stuck on? And there's something really, I think, really important about the rhythm of that, and the reminder every day that it's okay to be stuck, that people do get stuck. And you find that actually just a little bit of that communication, rather than seeing that as being like over talking, I would see that as being, it's a few minutes of everyone's time that's going to reduce procrastination for the rest of the day and give people momentum and motivation for the rest of the day. So this is where the yin and the yang come in that, if you completely eliminate all meetings, what do you lose? Motivation, clarity, permission, procrastination, like all these things will be bad effects if you just eliminated all meetings. Likewise, if you spend all day in meetings, then you don't have time to get stuff done. But keeping it to 15-20 minutes a day, being really focused and really disciplined on how you run that meeting. I think it's a hugely valuable thing, and I think often what you need is that dynamism of it being every day, rather than kind of saving stuff up for like once a week, once a fortnight, whatever. I've
got a client who do a daily huddle on a Monday, which is just like everybody shares what their priority for the week is.
Yeah.
On a Wednesday, they're quite a big team. So on a Wednesday, they get together, they share if they need any help achieving their priority. And Friday is about celebrating success.
Nice.
Nobody wants to be the person who turns up on a Friday and goes, I haven't done it.
Right. So motivation right there.
There's a question here from Michelle. I'll ask my director to give me the purpose of the meeting that he asked me to set up. So not sure if that's a question, but I think I know from previous workshops that I've delivered, people sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable about asking somebody senior, like, well, what's the purpose? So there's ways of doing that, isn't there? You can go to them and say, look, I'm looking forward to the meeting on Friday. In order to help me prepare, could you just tell me a bit more about what the purpose is, what we're looking to achieve, so I can be organized and on it and make a good contribution to that.
Or just like, I'm really excited about this. I really want to do a good job for you. So what's the purpose? Like, you just have to make it so difficult to disagree with.
Yes.
when you're managing up, I mean, you have to look at that as being like, oh, this person's keen. And also look at those as opportunities not to lose face or be overly sort of naggy, but actually to gain trust and to gain reputation, with those people.
And Joe's question kind of relates to that. It says, how can we encourage others, especially bosses or those who are less organized, to follow the rules around fixing meetings? So it's that managing up piece, isn't it? And I delivered our fixing meetings session to a group of PAs. So they're all kind of in PA and executive assistant kind of roles. They take the minutes, they put the things in the calendar. And it's really about just trying to create that culture, just asking those questions. For me to do my best work, it helps if I understand what you want from me in this meeting. Oh, right, you want me to give a presentation or a project update under this agenda item. And then you say, that's great, I'm happy to do that. How long have I got? Do you need me to stay for the rest of the meeting? So it could be a way of reducing your attendance as well.
Sarah is asking, where can I find a good model of a charter for my senior leadership team? I've Googled and there are hundreds. Hayley, I'm thinking about the, so we shared Think Productive's meetings manifesto. And I think it's on that resources page for the book, but can you remember the URL? Because my memory is terrible.
Totally I think, and I would double check this. I think it's thinkproductive.com/meetings or meeting resources.
Meeting resources. I think it's, thinkproductive.com/meeting resources.
If Jess is still here, she might be able to tell us if that's correct
right now. Because Sarah, that's a good place to start. Is Think Productive. We shared our own online, and I think that's a good starting point.
And
then that's a good charter for organizations. If you're talking about a good charter for like behavior in one particular meeting, I would say, again, coming back to that thing of people actually just really appreciate that structure, is write a first draft and say, here's something to disagree with. This is the 80% version, help us get to 100%, and just spend 5 minutes in the next of those meetings, just clarifying and shaping that to what you want it to be, because then everybody owns it, right? And then it's yours rather than one that you found on the internet.
Right, what else we got here? So this is an anonymous question, and I really like it. So the team I work with struggle to maintain regular team meetings, and when they do happen, they also struggle to make them useful and productive. Without them, we feel disconnected, and although we work in silos, but they just turn into a circle of people reeling off their current projects. Do we have a regular team meeting? And if so, how do we handle them? So at Think Productive, we're generally remote. The productivity ninjas work in different places. So there's the daily huddle for the head office team that Graham mentioned earlier. And then we get together 2 or 3 times a year for our kind of more formal away day type meetings. But then there are opportunities to engage that are optional. People can come if they want to. And I think that is quite a good format. I think if people are just sharing information and giving a project update, there are loads of different ways that they could do that.
There are just better ways to do that, right? That's ultimately it. So I kind of look at it like a huddle a huddle is the micro, right? So huddle is like day to day. I'm stuck on this tiny piece of this tiny thing. What do we do? And then like the away days that we have 2-3 times a year, those are like the macro, like strategy. Where are we in the world? Like, what are we doing? And I think like the bit in the middle for me is the bit to try and avoid having meetings about. Like that's about Slack channels, email updates, reports. Like there are just better ways to kind of share progress on stuff than sitting in a meeting together. I think there's room for a little bit of that. So if you can like share the progress on particular projects through reports, and then you get together just to question those or interrogate those. I've sat on boards that worked really well for that, where people do genuinely read the papers and then come to it with really incisive questions, and it just ups the game of everybody there. But that takes some discipline, and I think if you don't necessarily have that discipline to start with, which is where the question kind of starts, I would say try and remove that for that kind of mid-range operational project level. Like keep the communication as being kind of face-to-face or Zoom for like the kind of how do you solve stuff in the moment, like day to day, like a huddle, and then the real big kind of macro strategy type stuff.
And particularly at the moment with a lot of people working at home, there are going to be some people they want to meet and it's just a social thing and they just want to see each other's faces and chat with colleagues. So do that, do a social thing that you can go to if you want to, you don't have to. Maybe we meet for lunch or let's have a coffee at 11 o'clock. So providing different ways for people to interact with each other. It doesn't have to be part of a formal meeting.
There's a question on the chat one, Hayley, from Jay. Is it? Phil, saying, I like the idea of no agenda, no attendance, but how have you seen companies successfully implement this? And I think there's a couple of ways I can answer that. So one is Amazon has a very famous policy around meetings, which we talk about in the book. and the way that they deal with it is every meeting has to have an agenda statement at the beginning, and then when people arrive in a meeting at Amazon, they'll get the sort of pre-prepared information can never be more than 7 pages long, so 7 pages of A4 or less. And the first 20 minutes of the meeting is everyone silently reading the stuff before you actually start chatting. So really kind of strict format. It always happens in the same way, but it kind of just starts from the point of view of everyone's busy, no one will have had time to read this, so let's get together first, rather than trying to blag it. And it works in that kind of way. So having like a really well set up structure, I think, makes it very difficult for you to start implementing something like, just rocking up to a meeting where there's going to be no agenda, because it's just such a set way of doing things. But I think the other way of saying, of kind of showing the importance of no agenda, no attendance is, I think of it more as an individual thing rather than as a collective thing. So even just within an organization, I think if you start to push back, and if you start to say, oh, well, I could come to that, but you haven't told me what the agenda is, so I don't know why. Like, why am I going to be there? I think, yes, there are times where that is less feasible politically, or it feels, like it's just a difficult thing to push back on. But what you'll find is the times when you can push back on it, people notice it, and then what they start doing is, it's like that thing in Wayne's World, right? Like they tell their friends and they tell their friends, and it kind of multiplies. And so it has a kind of cultural effect, even if you do it individually. So I would say, like, don't try and change the whole culture of the organization with that overnight. Like, change the culture of your organization with, here's how we do meetings, and then you'll naturally find that there'll just be better meetings with more agendas. So you don't need that so much in that way. Do you want to do another one?
Yeah. Vicky's got a question. How do you prevent multiple meetings on similar topics? I tried to join them together, but now that means there's lots of people involved. Otherwise, I spend a lot of time explaining what happened in the meeting and actions. So yeah, that sounds tricky. So yeah, kind of combining them, that sounds like a positive thing. And do all of those 8 people need to be involved every time? Like, there might be some people who maybe need to just come, like maybe the finance person only needs to come if you're looking at the budget in relation to the project, for example. So encouraging people to make guest appearances so they don't have to be there for the whole thing. Going back to them and asking them, we combine these things. Are we finding that helpful or not? Like, let's have an honest conversation about it.
I also think it comes back to purpose, right? So what's the primary purpose for the meeting, and then which things kind of fit in underneath that. And so once you start to really quantify the purpose, you kind of start to work out if there's 4 purposes and you need 4 meetings, or whether actually they're all under one, and start to maybe reduce a bit of that overlap. I really like the guest appearances thing as well, just turning up for the part of the agenda that's your thing, and that being the other thing about guest appearances, it helps the rest of the meeting stay on track as well, because you're pressured by, David's going to join for this hour, and he's going to be here in 10 minutes, so we better finish our bit beforehand. So I think it just kind of helps with that too.
Yeah.
Let's do a couple more. Still like 40 people on here, so thank you for sticking around for dark.
Jerry
we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. We'll just do a couple more.
Yeah, Jerry says, do you have any views on specific software for meetings and recording decision making? So I think by that, Jerry, you probably mean like recording the decisions that are made in the meetings. So we're talking now about minutes and stuff, rather than like, do we record the meeting or not?
Yeah.
I think it's good to have clarity around all of those things before a meeting starts. So I'm a governor at my son's school, and like the minutes are quite detailed. And we have to kind of record like the decisions, who's challenging what. But for most meetings, I think, just recording, this is what we decided, these are the next actions. You don't need kind of a list of exactly who said what, but really important, when you're setting the meeting up and designing it, to think about who's going to do that, who's going to make it. And I think one of the, around the software, we obviously quite like Zoom. Zoom is the kind of platform that we're using at the moment, but it's about what works for you and your organization. I think it's better to choose something that works and stick with it, rather than have everybody using something completely different and different teams and loads of different things to be learning to use. Graham,
the other thing, just a little tip, is turn the video recording off before you start doing the recap of the minutes bit, and then you've got a new recording for just that bit, or turn on Lumen, have Lumen on as a sort of back-to-back with Zoom thing, so you're just recording screen and discussion and whatever, just for that 3 minutes of wrap up or the 10 minutes of final discussions or whatever. I think that can be quite a good way of doing it. The other thing I use quite a lot, which is maybe a bit lazy, but I think it's quite human, is just WhatsApp voice.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Turning on the voice recorder at the point where you're just going to summarize the actions, and then you can send that out to people as well. And I just like that because you can hear the tone in people's voice, and this is maybe not so important. This is really important. It's just different from when it's written down, black and white on an email.
And I think that works for project updates as well. It doesn't have to be a written report or an email. It could be a Loom or WhatsApp message to just kind of say, right, this is where we're at with this project, this area of work.
Cool.
Okay, we've got a handful of questions left. We're doing well. Jenny's agreeing, things that are ongoing, just slow things down, but how to challenge that. So I think there's nothing wrong with saying, just this ongoing thing. Is that helping us? Is it working for us? Maybe we need to kind of be decisive. Maybe we need to decide what we're going to do before the next meeting for what that looks like. So if you're thinking it's slowing things down, other people will be too, I'm sure.
I like Jennifer's thing that she inadvertently did the delete a day challenge through desperation, but will now view it as a positive trait thing. And, that's so true, isn't it? That we do this so much. Like we'll take drastic action and be decisive when the stress really gets to us and everything's on top of us or whatever. Like, why not just act like that all the time? And then you get time back even when you're not so stressed, right? So I think that's a really good,
and people thank you for it.
Good lesson, like outside of this.
I
like Jill's question there. We have a number of meetings set up in response to the pandemic which were crisis but are becoming normal. Any tips on how to engineer these out? I mean, I really relate to that question because I really felt like Think Productive, we obviously lost a lot of our work in the first couple of months of the pandemic and rebounded really strongly sort of off the back of that, and mainly because we set up offerings around working from home and things that we knew that people could translate what we were doing into stuff that people really needed in that moment. That was really useful, but it kind of felt like for a long time we were in this sort of permanent state of crisis. And one of the things I think might be useful here is to just take on some kind of moment of ceremony, right? To say, hey, welcome back to the new normal. Like, it's not the same as the old normal, but it's not crisis. And actually just mark it just so that people can have that little sense of we're not in permanent crisis. And it's taken me a long time to really get my head back into a sort of more normal way of working, and kind of even just giving myself permission to go back to do my 4-day week from doing sort of relentless 5-day weeks and all that sort of thing. Anything you want to add on that one, Hayley?
No, I think it's that classic, it's gone stale, hasn't it? So pulling it out, it's gone stale. And maybe if we take a break from this meeting for a month, let's see what we miss.
But also I think people are just really people are kind of desperate for normality and can we just get back to, there's a lot of that appetite, isn't there, for that stuff anyway. So I think being able to market and make it good news is a good thing. Lorna saying, as someone who struggles with Amazon, your book is also available on Blackwell's. Yes, and also bookshop.org, which I really like. It takes its stock for books from local bookshops as well. It's about 50p more expensive, I think, on bookshop.org than it is on Amazon. But to be honest, I'm buying a lot of books myself on bookshop.org. But we have to sort of promote Amazon because it really helps us with launching this book out into the world. So
we do one last question.
Let's do one more.
Colin is still here. I just checked, so
sure.
I'll answer Colin's question.
There's some nice, thoughtful hosting. Modeling it, love it.
Other things for the Delete a Day challenge: do start making meetings on the hour. Don't start making meetings start on the hour. Don't run meetings for a full hour. The default setting in Outlook is an hour. So I think that's why so many meetings are. And I did some work in an organization where they changed that centrally in their Outlook. everything was automatically half an hour. And do you know what, if you wanted a meeting that was going to be more than half an hour, you had to really justify why you were doing that.
But also, if you're many of you I'm sure know this, but if you're setting up a meeting in Outlook and you want to just, if you manually click on the times and the numbers, you can change it to whatever you want. So you can start it at like 10:17 if you want. And that's just a nice little tip, is to sort of avoid, everybody's meetings are an hour because that's what Microsoft tell us, right?
Yes. Cool.
Are we going to do Lena's one? Last one?
Yeah, we'll do Lena's question. I don't think Lena's here anymore, but we'll still do Lena's question because
We'll still do it.
Helpful for people.
And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so if you realise you're in the meeting where you're not really needed, what's the best approach to politely get out? So I think I would say, do you need me to stay? Yeah, just to ask. I think if it was a regular ongoing meeting, I would have a chat with the person who's kind of chairing that meeting about, do I still need to be there on an ongoing basis? And what can I contribute to the meeting that's helpful? Graham, any other thoughts?
Well, I think sometimes with a lot of this stuff, I think back to like ninja stealth and camouflage, and ultimately a lot of that comes back to the idea that it's okay to cheat, right? If cheating gets you to better productivity for your organization. So one of the things I'd say with that is, suddenly I'm looking at an email on my phone, or taking a phone call, something's come up, I need to leave. So if you can't think of a really genuine way to have that conversation, or the chair's in the middle of something or whatever, just feign a little emergency back at the ranch or whatever. And of course, in the days of working from home, then your internet just stopped working, did it? Just for that hour. So sometimes, and I say this with when we do email workshops and stuff as well, like we're so conditioned through school to be perfect students, and handing everything in perfectly and stuff. And sometimes we have to recognize that productivity can be messy. Sometimes cheating is the way to get to what we need to get to, right? Go the unorthodox route. We finished all the questions, Hayley.
Yes.
Fiber upgrades were a godsend to get out of some meetings, says Jordan. Yeah, like absolutely. Why not? So we're going to wrap this up. So yeah, massive thank you to the 21 of you who are in After Dark Club. Stayed the whole course. So yeah, just really humbled to have your time and attention this afternoon, and thank you for being part of this. Thank you for pre-ordering the book, those of you who have already, and please do spread the word. We'll put this up on YouTube as well, probably early next week. So do point people towards it who missed it, and we'll do a bit of that social sharing stuff as well. And thank you everybody. Hayley, do you want to leave us with some final wise thoughts, which I'm going to put you on the spot for the second time?
I expected to be wise today. Yeah, I mean, just have a go at this stuff. Every little helps.
Yeah, it's true.
You're not going to change all of your meetings overnight necessarily, but just have a go and really start thinking about, where can I go to less meetings? How do I make the ones I do go to better? And even if you're not chairing the meeting, you're participating, you're turning up, you've got kind of a responsibility to try and make that meeting work. So good luck, and let us know how you get on.
Good luck, everyone. And there's loads more in the book, just saying.